Hi, everybody. Welcome back from your breakout rooms. My name is Madison Gallagher, and I'm very excited to introduce our next panel. The topic of this panel is AI in the public sector, challenges and future opportunities, and it is sponsored by the Deloitte AI Institute for Government. I'll introduce our panelists in just a minute, and we do have some questions we're going to go through, but we would love to hold some time for audience questions at the end as well. So please do use the poll everywhere to submit some questions, and we'll get to those at the end. So we will start by introducing Christina Canavan. Christina is a managing director in Deloitte's advisory cyber risk practice. She has more than 17 years of experience in planning, designing, and leading efforts in data analysis, data profiling, and statistical sampling and estimation techniques for both federal agencies and Fortune 500 companies. And that includes more than 13 years focusing on the Department of Defense. She specializes in identifying and addressing data quality and integrity issues and leveraging system data to provide recommendations regarding risk, performance, and goal achievement. We also have with us today Vanita Fordham. Vanita is a specialist leader in Deloitte Consulting's advisory and cognitive practice, focusing on artificial intelligence, the US intelligence community, and technology innovation areas. She previously served as a senior executive at the Central Intelligence Agency, where she established a name for herself by delivering novel and unique solutions with mission impact. She was the deputy director of a team of technologists, program managers, developers, and data scientists that identified, assessed, and piloted emerging and disruptive technologies to address challenges. And throughout her career, she's worked closely with industry, academia, and investment firms to provide solutions that advance mission rapidly. Her background in computer engineering and program management has facilitated a career across commercial industry and public sector, which most notably included leading efforts in infrastructure design and implementation, developing and delivering software solutions that provide intelligence to senior government officials, and providing technical architecture oversight of complex enterprise capabilities. We also have with us Sarah Milsom, who's a senior manager in Deloitte Consulting's analytics and cognitive practice. Sarah has over 12 years experience advising multinational public sector clients on strategy and operations challenges. Her consulting experience is combined with her academic research background, where she researched and published on a variety of international economic development topics during her time in the Global Economy and Development Program at the Brookings Institution. Most recently, Sarah has delivered complex strategy and analytics projects to the Department of State's Center for Analytics, including the development of the department's first ever enterprise data strategy, as well as leadership of the coronavirus data and analytics team. So happy to have you all here. Again, my name is Madison Gallagher. I'm a manager in Deloitte's analytics and cognitive practice, and mostly have spent my time in federal financial regulators doing analytics projects all the way from data visualization to natural language processing and predictive modeling for fraud. So excited to have you all here. As a double who, I'm very glad to be here as part of the Women in Data Science program. We'll start with some questions, and I'm going to kick to you, Christina, first with a really broad one. What is one thing as a society we need to get right with AI?
I feel like that is such a loaded question, Madison. And
Yeah.
I was thinking about it, beforehand and how to try to answer that one, because I think there's so many different ways to tackle that or to try to look at it. I think one of the things that I think still needs to be reconciled, or we still need to resolve as a society around AI, is the perception or misperception of what is AI, what is it going to do, how will it help or destroy what we are doing from a society standpoint. I feel like there still are those camps of it's going to take away my job, it's going to reduce our workforce, I'm not going to have anything to do. And then there's the other people who see it as a real accelerator in growth and like, hey, this totally benefits me. And I think that is like one fundamental thing that we still have conversations around and concerns, just kind of broadly from a society standpoint around AI. That I think, I don't know how we're going to resolve that one, but I feel like that is still something that we have to keep going through. The other thing, if I could give you two answers that I think we have to answer as a society standpoint, we've been spending, I think Vanita especially has been spending a lot of time talking about, is how do we make sure we are providing trustworthy AI, that it's ethical, that we are looking at what is our responsibility around AI and ethical and trustworthy AI, and what does that mean at the end of the day? Even as recently as yesterday in a conversation, trying to dig into what does that mean? Like when you start talking about that word ethical, that's also pretty loaded. And how do you answer that? How do you make sure that we are looking at that responsibly? We're looking at bias in our models, that we're looking at what is the outcome going to come from those models? And I feel like that's one fundamental thing that we need to get our arms wrapped around from a society standpoint around AI. But I would love to hear what Vinita has to say on that, because I know that she's been spending a lot of time thinking about this from a Deloitte standpoint.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. The thing that I would say, just to tag on first with the first point that you made, is I actually had probably a little bit more siloed view in the sense that AI really should be used as a tool for advancement, not as a replacement. And I think that there is very much different schools of thought and fears of the unknown of what AI can provide. So it's a general awareness of what actually is AI, what are we talking about here? And then recognition that the function of applying AI is left to the human beings, and ultimately so is that judgment. So it's just a tool to help us. It's a tool to make it that much easier to solve those problems and answering more questions and giving us the capacity to innovate much more broadly than we ever have. And that's the way I look at it from that perspective. The trustworthiness aspect of it, I think that's something, it is not only an issue that I think we're just on the cusp of starting to really recognize that it's a huge issue, but then just going forward, it's going to just become more and more of an imperative. And that's, I think, all facets of society from that aspect of it. And it goes back to understanding. So, we talk about the black box of AI is, input X gives you output Y. Well, what's that black box? How do you turn that into a glass box? And that's a big part of what the explainability aspect of that and trustworthy aspect of that is. And so that being said, Sarah, if you have other insights, it would be great to hear.
I would just add, completely agree with everything you both said. I also think it's important, especially with my sort of international development hat on, to think about how do we make sure that no one, right, no matter where they are in the world, is sort of left behind and deprived of these benefits, right, that we envision and see for AI in society. I think that's another sort of dimension that we're still really grappling with in terms of equity and accessibility to the potential benefits that AI offers.
Really good point.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, really great to kind of unpack what that equity and benefit means to different people and in different ways. Another question I'm excited for all three of you to answer, particularly with differing perspectives coming from, the defense sector, the Department of State, the security intelligence sector. I'd love to hear, what would you like to see from your perspective the government focus time and energy on in the AI realm? Let's start with Vinita. I know you've had an interesting, career in the government. What would you like to see government focus time and energy on?
Yeah, thanks, Madison. So I think the first thing that I wanted to I would start off by saying is a recognition that there's currently a number of initiatives going on. And so, people are aware from a government perspective that investments need to be made, that this is a way to be able to solve challenges quickly, as well as being able to take advantage of maybe a lack of resources that aren't necessarily available on a regular basis. And in particular, just based on my own experience, there are many initiatives underway from the intelligent national security realm, right, within intelligence community and DoD. So I want to make sure that we all recognize that piece of it. But it's funny because I think we're just going to follow on from the first question with regards to the points. Is I think the application of AI, it's the same granular answer with regards to, are we applying it in the right way? And has the government, what are those considerations to ensure that's being applied in the most effective way? When you talk about getting insights from this exponential amount of data, and then what are the insights that are gained, and is it worth the cost in applying it in certain areas versus others? So I think that is a really important place that the government, when we talk about investments that they're making in applying AI and developing solutions, that it's in that realm. The other two goes back to the explainable AI, and that is a very tough topic. Because it goes to peeling back the onion, revealing the glass box, if you will, of really, are the outcomes that we're expecting, are those the outcomes that we're achieving? And then how can we ensure the trustworthiness of that data? Again, going back to the bias versus unbiased of those models and the training of that. And so how do we ensure that all those factors are guarded against? And then again, putting a little bit of the national security color into it. And frankly, just from an industry perspective, you know, how do we ensure that we are monitoring these models once they're out into the real world, such that we're guarding against data poisoning and model efficacy towards that? So those are the types of things. I know this particular topic is probably a multi-day session in and of itself with a lot of philosophical debate, but I do think that that's a consideration that the government needs to take and continue to put their time and energy on.
Yeah, great response. Sarah, could you weigh in as well?
Yeah, you know, and just thinking through sort of, you know, my exposure to the implementation of AI that I've seen as well in the public sector, I think one thing I'd love to see is a little bit more of an intentional focus on that journey from pilot to scale, right? There's a lot of energy around AI right now. There's a lot of enthusiasm to unlock the potential and to really apply it to sort of mission critical needs and increase competitiveness, et cetera. But there doesn't always seem to be sort of a concerted, intentional plan for how are we going to go from sort of experimenting with AI to really applying it at the enterprise level. And more intentional thinking around that roadmap, I think, would be an accelerator right up that maturity curve for sure.
I love that. Yeah, Christina, anything to add?
I mean, they couldn't have said it better. I think when I was thinking back to some of the things that Sarah, you were just saying, and Vanita, absolutely agree. I think as we look at the intentionality that Sarah was mentioning of how are we going to, how should the government be focusing on their AI strategy? What is that vision? What is that foundational understanding? How does that then tag into their organization, the strategy? I mean, even getting down to like, what are the processes that are trying to reimagine with AI and why, and where are they applying it? I think that's certainly something that's needed from a focus standpoint. If I'm being very selfish, having moved over to cyber 2 years ago and getting, moving into cyber when we didn't really know cyber, like I knew there'd be unknown unknowns, but man, you walk into that world and it is a scary place. So from that perspective, my mind immediately, Madison, went to really from a cyber operations standpoint, how do we leverage AI to stop the adversaries and what we see from a defensive position? I mean, I personally feel like all of us should be focused on that. But really from that bigger standpoint, it's that intentionality of how are they applying AI? How does that drive their strategy and their structure from a government standpoint?
Yeah, cyber is a scary world if you think too hard about it. So totally agree.
It really is.
So Sarah, I'll ask you to take this next question first, because I think you're already starting to touch on that a little bit. What challenges or barriers do you currently see in the near future now or in the near future to implementing AI solutions?
Yeah, I think we're sort of beginning to unpack this, in the last couple of questions, but I was thinking about this a little bit more as well, Madison. And I do think it's important to start at where are we today, right, across the public sector on implementing AI. And Deloitte actually did a survey, right, not that long ago, where I think 75% of the 2,000 organizations surveyed identified as being in that experimentation phase. So it's still very early days, and that really is important for sort of thinking through what are the major barriers and challenges. So I was thinking through a sticky way to remember this, and I came up with 3 A's: ability, adaptability, and adoption. And the ability is really around the talent and the skills, right? There's different skills needed to either buy, develop, or deploy AI within the public sector that aren't traditional, right, within the public sector. And even if they are, there's been a focus on this, it's at an unprecedented level, right? And there's a shortage of this sort of talent pool in the labor market. And then, couple that with the public sector needing to be competitive and incentivize folks to join them, with salaries, et cetera. It makes it really, really difficult. And the other sort of aspect to ability I was thinking about is within the existing workforce too, and this gets a little bit into the glass box, right, in the trustworthy piece that my colleagues were talking about here, but there needs to be elevation in data literacy, data comfort, data fluency, call it what you want, right? But there needs to be a lot of sort of internal focus on that as well. Adaptability, I'm thinking of this more around how well will the organization adapt to the changes that inevitably come with scaling AI, right? As we were all discussing, this is a transformational change to the way we work, to the way we organize, to the way we hire, our culture, IT infrastructure, data strategy, you name it, it matters, right? And it's a huge amount of change all sort of coming in at one time. And so how you handle that change management will be really, really critical. And I think it's a challenge we're still all grappling with. And then lastly is adoption. And I'll just touch on this because I think it's already been well covered, but it's, you know, the willingness of individuals, right, within an organization to feel comfortable to actually apply these solutions to answer critical mission decisions, right? There needs to be trust that the data was collected in an ethical manner, that the models are unbiased and appropriate and fair, and having the transparency to build that trust is really, really important. And one other interesting nugget from that survey that I think matters here is I think half of those organizations had mentioned that they would be implementing AI for mission critical activities in the next 12 months, but only 20% had an ethical framework. And that's sort of a red flag that this is an area that needs a lot more focus as we move ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Christina, would you address the same question?
Yeah, and Sarah, I love your the 3 A's. I think that was a great way to lay it out. I think when I looked at this question, I was going back to the old school sticky way to think of things of people, process, and technology. Of got the technology, we can productionalize our processes, but going back to the beginning, if we don't have the people, that is going to be like hard stop right there in order to, as we look to progress and advance AI. And I think some of the challenges that we see is really the development of the workforce, the scaling of the workforce. And I mean, we see it ourselves and we hear it from our clients and our mission partners that we work with, that retention of those resources and making sure they have really exciting, relevant work to do also is really important. And I think that aspect of really that focus on the people, how are we going to make sure they have that exciting work? How are they going to make sure that they're always being upskilled or even reskilling folks is going to be so important and prevalent as we look at really deploying AI across the workforce.
Yeah, awesome. Vanita, what about you? Anything to add there?
I was just to say, Sarah, you did a beautiful job in kind of explaining all of that very succinctly. and just to tag on to what both of you have already said with regards to workforce, I don't think that can be underscored enough, because that skill set is something that I think just every levels of industry, from academia, public sector, private sector, it's an issue that needs to be addressed, because AI is only going to grow from a technology and a needs perspective as people try to understand it more. The only other thing that I think is a really large consideration, and you touched on it, both, I think Sarah and Christina both touched on it, was around data. So the data management aspect of it, I think is a foremost challenge as well. There's an exponential amount of data that exists, as we all know, globally, and it's just exponentially increasing. And so being able to scale how we access that data, how we control the access of it, what are the relevant data sources, and how we ingest that. It goes back to that enterprise question of how do we scale these models and how do we take advantage of those sources.
Yeah, I know we heard the opening session this morning focus on data infrastructure and management, and what a topic that can be very dry but so interesting and critical.
Yeah, I have a friend that he always says, he's like, we don't have a math problem, we have a data problem. Like, we can't do that, then it doesn't matter what the math can do.
Exactly. Math can't fix a mess of data. So awesome. Okay, well, we have another question I'll pose to the panel. I just want to remind folks in the audience to please go ahead and submit questions via the poll everywhere, because we'll get to that next. But want to cover something really important, since you guys are, such experienced and successful women. We are here at the Women in Data Science event. What advice would you share with rising women on what's helped fuel your success in a STEM career in the AI realm? Christina, do you want to start?
Sure. I feel like I have so many things I would wish to impart to the audience here around this and success in a career. But I think a couple of different things, whether it's in the STEM career, STEAM, or however we look at it, I think there's always an openness to what is coming next. When I started my career in actually, I gave Madison the wrong bio. It's actually 20 years plus at Deloitte now, not 17. I've been adding up those years. But when I started with Deloitte, 20 years ago, back in 2001, I was brought in to do IT controls, which was great. I had an information science background, decision science background. I was brought into Deloitte. I felt really lucky to be here. But as I started walking the halls and getting a better understanding of all the different things that are out there, I had a great opportunity to work with a team that was really focused on developing analytics and programming in SAS at the time and really digging in, and I really enjoyed it. And what I took away from that experience was I said, hey, I really actually like this. Can I switch from doing IT controls and start diving into this analytics world? And, at 22 years old, I probably had zero understanding of what that really meant, but I was able to articulate that I found something I really liked. It was very technical. I really enjoyed the programming aspect and getting my hands on keyboard, getting dirty in that and really learning. And through that, like the opportunities just, they came and I got to learn and I got to jump in, and it was always saying yes to that next opportunity, taking advantage of the training that was there and being really open to what was ever out there. And I think that really, where I started and where I am today, never would have imagined in a million years that I would be here. But I think it was great. And it's always going back to articulating what you need. And what you want. That is imperative, and no matter what field that you are in, you have to be able to articulate that and being open to those opportunities and challenges as they come up and saying yes and jumping in with both feet, maybe with eyes wide open or eyes closed, not sure, but just embracing it all and really running with it, I think is so important, especially in this field. And the other thing I would say too, just from a career standpoint, as we move into this space with AI, and I have two boys that are 9 and 11, and I look at them and the coding that they're doing and the opportunities that they have and the way that they're learning. It's much more about being really creative and really, how do you problem solve? How do you apply that critical thinking to these challenges? And when my son says he's learning how to code, I look at it in my mind, like old school mind. I'm like, that's not coding, but that is, and that's how they're learning. And he's learning how to be creative and how to apply some of those techniques. So I think that creativity piece is going to be so important as you move into the workforce and really get into and some of the challenges that your clients or your firm will face or whatever it may be, is bringing that creativity to work every day. So I'll pass it off. I know Vanita and Sarah have got to have great advice too.
Yeah, Vanita, why don't you go next?
Sure. So I think, the idea of I've always been one to follow my own intellectual curiosity, if you will. So, and it's always had a bent for technology and innovation. And it sounds like very similar to Christina's journey. And I'm a techie who loves to play. It doesn't matter what I've been doing or what I've been managing. I've always had to have the gadgets and all of the demos and the pilots on my desk to play around with, but always with the lens of what's next? How can we solve that next problem? What's the big challenge? And I think that's really important, is to be continuously asking the questions of how can we improve? Why can't we do that? Why can't we take that on? And standing up, right? As Christina said, is to take the roles to actually drive that change and to recognize that change isn't just about changing the process, you're changing a culture. And you have to be, your people are going to be looking at you, and it's okay. It's okay to stand up and take that risk and to really move forward, recognizing what you can change. The other piece to it is respecting that collaboration is the key as well, right? So it's not just about your journey, it's recognition that there's a broader good here, and who are all the people with you on their own journeys to be able to go to that common vision and that common mind to accomplishing thing. The last thing that I would say for myself is I think I attribute a lot of the successes I've had to having very strong mentors every step of the way. And I think for me, it was very important. And it's not just your immediate sphere, it's also looking outside, like to help diversify the perspectives. And I think that's a really important piece as well.
Awesome. Sarah?
Yeah, loving all of this, full agreement on everything that you both have shared. I was also thinking about, because Madison, I think you worded the question as, specifically around STEM, and I had a sort of meandering journey, right? I have a public policy degree. I worked at a think tank. I've done some international development work. And then I was like, hey, data is super critical to us making any real impact here. And so then moving towards the need in that way. And I think what I've learned, which has been really, really valuable, is you can apply STEM thinking, STEAM thinking, right? Whichever way you want to look at it, into any project too. So I think there tends to be this sort of hyper focus, like I want to code, right? So I'm only going to work on projects where I can, work on that 40 hours a week, nothing else. It's really, really hard to find those like pure, perfect projects. And I've realized that no matter where I've gone and what I've worked on, I'm able to sort of bring in the analytic piece to it, the, impact, evaluation, mathematical side to whatever it is I'm doing, even if it's more strategic leaning. And it sort of helped me, right? Sort of build a sort of bridge area that I think is super, super critical to the success of our clients as well.
I love that. Yeah. And resonates with me as well. My path to AI was also kind of meandering, which is great because you bring a lot of different experiences to the table.
So we have diversity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We have a bunch of questions coming in from audience members, which is fantastic. I'm going to go through the top voted ones. This first one I find super interesting, which is how do we see the role of the public sector versus the private sector in advancing AI solutions? Should the government be on the cutting edge of AI when there's so many ways for new AI solutions to go wrong? Things like biases and algorithms, things like ethical conundrums. Should the public sector be the ones really kind of working out all of those kinks, or should we leave it to the private sector to start with that? Anyone care to start with that question?
So, I'll take it. My thought as you were talking about or asking the question was, I really see it as a partnership between the public sector and industry, and that's not a softball answer. It's really is. There are some unique challenges that the government is going to have that the commercial industry and private sector won't necessarily have. And that's what's going to also help advance how we view the use of applying the technology as well as the next generation of technologies. And we've seen that a couple of different ways manifest itself. Again, like in the realm that I'm coming from a national security standpoint, and I'm sure Christina and Sarah can kind of talk through some of from a security constraint standpoint, sometimes it's really hard to apply some of those cool technologies and you don't think about the constraints that you're subject to in order to protect data, right, readily the way that you may from a commercial standpoint. So I do see it as a partnership.
I agree with you, Vanita. I think that's a great way to describe it. I think there's also probably going to be certain pockets of things that are probably more public sector focused or from mission driven. Sorry, it's my child. Mission driven standpoint that the public sector is going to be focused on, and thinking about it from a cyber standpoint. I do feel like we see a difference sometimes in terms of what some of our commercial clients are focused on versus what some of our DoD clients are focused on. They're looking to not just be defensive, but also offensive. And when you look at some of our private sector clients and potential clients, that's not necessarily high on their radar. So I think we are going to see some differentiation depending on what the industry is, but I think it absolutely will be a partnership at the end of the day, because there's always a lot of conversation back and forth of what is the private sector doing? What's the public sector doing? Can we bring best practices of both to each?
Awesome.
Yeah, I would only add, I think we don't really have the luxury of waiting, right, from the public sector perspective either. As Christina was saying, like, this is a national security imperative, right? The competitors are using this technology now. So I think it's really leveraging this partnership and identifying those areas where we can learn from each other. That's going to be critical.
Yeah, it's a great question though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Well, this next one, I think I might shoot to Vanita first. I kind of love it because it's got a little bit of a tactical bent to it, which is how do we create an ethical framework for AI that allows it to be an ongoing conversation rather than a series of boxes we check at the beginning of a project? Do you have, tips for how we can carry that out through projects?
Yeah, and that's actually quite a long discussion that's been going on internally in Deloitte as well. It's a very popular topic, and I think one of the big ones that always resonates with me whenever we have this discussion is the idea of governance, but not necessarily the idea of overhead. So the point being is that just because a model is spit out, it worked out really great. We tested it against the critical factors that made us feel comfortable that it wasn't introducing the bias that we define, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be doing continuous monitoring against those models to ensure the efficacy going forward. And so it's basically implementing the idea of change management against the model development framework. And so that's what I would say with that. And again, this isn't just about the model and the algorithms itself, it's about the data. It's about ensuring that the data that we're getting is a much more wide swath. It's ensuring against cybersecurity issues like data poisoning, adversarial AI, and malicious intent. And so thus, we can't just say we're done once we deploy something. We have to do continuous assessments.
I love that. Yeah. Christina or Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, to add on, I think I feel like we've been, like Vanita was saying, we've been having a lot of these conversations recently around especially as we look at how do we apply and look at how we monitor ourselves, how we're holding ourselves accountable. That whoever asked the question, I think that was a great way to put it. It can't be a compliance exercise. We can't just say, go through and check the box and say, yep, I looked for this, I'm good to go. It has to be an ongoing conversation. And, it can't be something that you wait until the very end to say, hey, did we do this right? It's from the very beginning that we look and almost spend more time there planning around how are we going to make sure we check and do all the checks and balances against, data poisoning and the model verification and all of that at the very beginning. How are we going to do that? How are we going to make sure we're applying it, holding ourselves accountable before we get to the very end? But yeah, lots and lots of conversation around this topic lately.
Yeah.
I don't know, Sarah, anything you wanted to add to it?
No, I like, Christina, your focus on the early investment too, right? Like clarity from the start on how you're going to have this be an iterative process will be really, really important. And the transparency piece. I love, Vanita, I hadn't heard yet the black box to the glass box, but I'm totally feeling it because it's like perfect. It really sort of summarizes like the criticality of the ethical framework around AI and having trustworthy AI. So I think that's something that, yeah, it's not a one and done exercise. It's something that has to be a continuous throughout the use of the solution.
Yeah.
I had the same note to myself of like, ooh, glass box. I like that. We talk about not loving the black box a lot, but like there's an alternative way to think about that from a more positive approach. So that's great. Sarah, I think this next one is really for you in terms of the 3 A's. What is the biggest barrier you see to AI adoption in the public sector?
Ooh, putting my 3 A's to work. Let's see. For the adoption, so what I see is, and it really just harps back to the last question too, is we can build the most beautiful, smart, amazing, unbiased, ethical solution that there is, but if people don't trust in it, then they're not going to use it, right? And for many, many decades, we've been making decisions, certain ways, especially in the public sector, and it's a big cultural change too, to say, well, now I'm going to rely on this machine to help me do my job better, and I'm going to share data that I haven't traditionally shared in order to have the enterprise be able to get new insights and so it's a huge sort of cultural shift in the way that we work with our colleagues, in the way that we share our information, the way that we're evaluated as successful employees. And to me, that's, a massive sort of change that's coming and is one of the, beyond the technical hurdles of like infrastructure and skills. I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges to overcome.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. I think it's laying that foundation too, because I still have had clients come and say, I need AI. What? Okay, what do you think that means? What does that mean to you? What does that actually mean with the problem set that you're trying to address? Is that the answer? And I think it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit ago of like, what is that foundational understanding of AI? How does that fit into the strategy and the organization to solve some of those challenges as we look at adoption? But just saying you need AI does not magically make everything wonderful and happen. So I think that will be a key part of AI adoption.
Yeah, and honing in that long-term approach, like,
Yeah.
what are you looking for, not just today, but tomorrow, to Sarah's point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, Here's a question around, I mean, I think very much to that same point around trust, right? We're talking about trust and we're talking about moving at the speed of trust to implement AI solutions. The field's moving so fast. And the question is, how do we balance the desire to move fast with the need to gain trust of the community, which I think is an interesting kind of way to tag that question, right? Because we have to get the trust of the public sector, but also the people that they serve, right? That we're kind of working for by proxy with the public sector every day. Anyone have any real good kind of thoughts about tactically setting up projects and efforts to build trust the best way that they can?
So I think it underscores the partnership with industry, because at the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're gaining awareness and understanding where technology is going and where these concepts are going, in order to be able to help with solving the challenges in the first place, and to be gaining trust. And it all goes back to making sure that we're informed, right? So fear starts to dissipate when we know more and feel more in control of what we know. And so by being hand in hand and really understanding where industry is going, where the technology is going, even if we're not investing in it right away, I think is a really important piece to lending itself to understanding and trusting more.
Well
Awesome.
said, Vanita.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. This is another good one to really pick up on what you were talking about in terms of scale, Sarah. The question as written is, how do we demonstrate successes in order to make a case for investment that will allow moving from pilot to scale in AI? And I guess I would tag on to that, is demonstrating success the main thing to kind of help us move from pilot to scale? I think often, data challenges can be we were just talking about data management and structure. And I find that often you can do something in a pilot, when you try to go broad with that, the data is just infinitely, messier. So what would you say is kind of the thing you can do to help move from pilot to scale?
Yeah, and there's toolkits on blueprints for how to sort of, go from experimentation through. But I would say in this case for AI, and in the context of the criticality of explaining AI and sort of, removing that level of fear by giving people awareness to AI, I would say you need to design pilots, right, that really demonstrate value in an area of potential comfort, right, for your enterprise. So you don't want to be like, I know I'm going to build a machine that does, and then it's some wild, huge, right, controversial thing, right? Start smaller to demonstrate, oh my gosh, this machine just read, X text, right? And really just show within your context its value. And then concurrently though, be thinking about that foundation. What's the data structure we're going to need to move this thing ahead? What is our enterprise data strategy? What IT infrastructure do we need? So it's showing incremental progress and sort of helping remove the fear unknown around AI in smaller increments, while starting to tackle some of these bigger, stickier challenges, so that as your community and your teams, your staff, et cetera, start to buy in, you're already laying the groundwork, sort of move up and scale that out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Vanita, Christina, I'm sure you have others from your experiences to add there.
Yeah, I think fail fast, right, is definitely the shift that we're seeing. And I think in the public sector, not that it's new, it's been around for a long time, but we're seeing more of a focus and push to it is really not always, but getting away from these large mega RFPs that plan out for 5 years, 10 years down the road, and looking into how to leverage Defense Innovation Unit, DefenseWorks, other transactional agreements, other ways that are really focused on pilot development, and being able to award a pilot to more than just one vendor, and industry being able to work back and forth with government in terms of asking, normally in the RFP process, it's kind of black box, right? Like you're not allowed to ask questions. You're only, it's a formal channels. You can't have any like real conversation. You have to do that all before the RFP. And with the way that they're moving to pilots, it's an ongoing conversation. It's government saying, hey, industry partner, like I've got this challenge. How would you tackle that? And it's a real back and forth that then leads to these pilots where they're going to have a chance to see if it works in small scale, if they're going to fail, or, Sarah, to your point, if there's a different way that they need to shift and change the technology to then, once they've got it like really honed in and they feel it's going to be successful, then move it to production. And I think that's something coupled with the focus on AI that will really be to public sector benefit as we move forward. But Vanita, would love to hear your thoughts too.
I was just saying, as you were talking, my previous life in government was flashing before my eyes, because that's exactly what we were striving for. Whenever we were looking at it, from an acquisition standpoint, it wasn't about the production acquisition in the beginning, right? It was about how do we create these mechanisms such that we had pilots in there quickly so that we could fail fast if we needed it. It was a low cost investment. And that was really important so that we knew what we really wanted to spend our time and commitment on from a long-term perspective. So I don't think I have anything else to add, because like I said, I could see my whole life before me. And just actually, it's funny because the other thing I was thinking was just yesterday, I was having a conversation with a government client specifically asking us about recommendations on low overhead rapid prototyping in this arena, just to underscore that.
Yeah, that's when you said, I know exactly how to do this. Let me tell you the way.
Absolutely. Okay, well, we are just about at time here. I'll give everyone here a chance to make any closing comments. And then I do want to say just a word about the Deloitte AI Institute for Government before we wrap up. But let's do, actually, I'll do that. And then you guys can get some closing comments together if you have any. So I'll just let you guys know that the Deloitte AI Institute for Government, which has the very fun acronym of DAIIG, I'm not sure how we're pronouncing that one yet, is a hub of innovative perspectives, groundbreaking research, and immersive experiences focused on artificial intelligence and its related technologies for the government audience. Through publications, events, and workshops, the goal is to help government use AI ethically to deliver better services, improve operations, and facilitate economic growth. It launched, I think, literally this week. So we're very excited about that. And I do believe there's a link to it in the program notes. Hope you guys can all check that out. Let's go to Christina. Any last comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful to be here today. I miss not seeing your faces. And hopefully next year, things may be different and we can be in person, but it was great to be here today. I hope you took something away. And in the future, whether you end up at Deloitte, I'm not great at social media, but I am on LinkedIn, I believe, but feel free to reach out. Always love to connect with folks, especially in the DC area. So best of luck in the future and hopefully get to see you guys one day.
Awesome. Vanita, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all for having us, and thank you to my colleagues. This was a really great discussion. And again, if there's anything as well from my part, please reach out from LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, be happy to chat.
Awesome. Sarah?
Just to reiterate the gratitude, thank you so much for this event. This is great. Really looking forward to connecting with all of you and hopefully in person next year.
Yep, I think we can all agree in person will be wonderful. Zoom is the second best for sure.
As long as I can still wear sweatshirts and no heels, right?
I think the dress code has changed for forever. So we're going to cut to a video now before a short break. Thank you, everybody, for being part of the panel today and for sending in your questions. Look forward to connecting again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.